Welcome to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, February 13th. I'm your host, Hannah Weaver. Today on the show, New York State is being sued by the federal government over its sanctuary laws.
This is a draconian approach to a very complicated problem.
In sports news, professional female skaters are challenging themselves with more difficult jumps to stay competitive. This is challenging coaches, too.
The people doing those jumps are the youngest. The girls, they're maybe 15. And I just don't think it's sustainable physically.
Has congestion pricing affected Broadway? We sent a reporter to survey theater lovers.
Broadway is doing a lot better this winter than it did last winter. So far, it's a winner.
And we hit Chelsea early this morning to find out how tariff threats impact New York's flower markets ahead of Valentine's Day. But first, the news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump has signed a memorandum that he says will lead to reciprocal tariffs on countries for a variety of reasons, for their tariffs as well as for non-tariff trade barriers. Trump says it's going to bring jobs.
If somebody wants to come in, including the car companies, if they want to come in and build car plants, they'll do it without tariffs, and therefore prices won't go up. There could be some short-term disturbance, but long-term, it's going to make our country a fortune.
During a more than hour-long Q&A with reporters at the White House today, Trump referenced former President Joe Biden as he panned the idea of Ukraine joining NATO, upending Kyiv's mission for stronger protections in light of Russia's military invasion in 2022.
I believe that's the reason the war started, because Biden went out and said that they could join NATO, and he shouldn't have said that.
Russia's war against Ukraine and Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza will dominate Secretary of State Marco Rubio's second trip abroad. He leaves tonight for the Munich Security Conference and then on to the Middle East. NPR's Michelle Kellerman has details.
The Munich Security Conference is an annual gathering of international diplomats, business and military leaders. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be there to meet Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary Rubio to hear about President Trump's ideas on how the war should end. Later in the weekend, Rubio will head to Israel, then to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. His spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, says he will focus on freeing all hostages from Hamas captivity, including Americans, and to push forward the ceasefire deal in Gaza. Saudi Arabia is also offering to host talks at some point between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
Federal workers are beginning to receive layoff notices as the Trump administration moves ahead with plans to drastically downsize the government. NPR's Shannon Bond reports many of the first cuts are targeting employees who were recently hired and still on probationary status.
Some probationary staff at the Department of Education received notices they were being terminated effective immediately, according to employees who spoke with NPR on condition of anonymity for fear of reprisal. At the General Services Administration, many recently hired employees were called into meetings late Wednesday and told they were being let go. The cuts come days after President Trump signed an executive order directing federal agencies to start preparing to, quote, initiate large-scale reductions in force. Trump and his advisor Elon Musk say they are slashing what they say is excessive government spending. Shannon Bond, NPR News.
Today, a federal judge ruled that the administration's plan to put thousands of staffers at USAID on paid leave is set to remain on pause through at least February 21st. U.S. stocks have ended the day higher, with the Dow closing up 342 points. From Washington, this is NPR News.
The Trump administration is suing New York State over one of its immigration laws. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced they're targeting the Green Light Law, which allows undocumented immigrants to get driver's licenses. I spoke with Lenny Benson, professor of immigration and human rights law at New York Law School, who broke down the potential impact of the suit.
So in this current suit, what Attorney General Bondi and the Department of Justice are saying is that New York is being complicit with the furtherance of unlawful presence of people in the United States when we allow them under our state law to qualify for driver's licenses.
So this law you're talking about is the green light law, is that correct?
Yes, the driver's license law, right.
Yeah, so why is this something that the Trump administration is going after in particular?
Well, the way they want to demonize our undocumented population is to say that if you have a driver's license, you can rent a car, then you can escape law enforcement. So again, fear tactic. I mean, what the effect of a lawsuit like this and the publicity is not so much the law will declare New York State's law to be in any violation, but instead to create greater fear. And so people won't renew their licenses. People won't apply for their licenses. And then we, the people of New York and the people of the United States, will bear the consequences of more who is that driver, uninsured drivers. And so it just doesn't make any sense.
You beat me to the punch there with my question about the potential impacts. Are there any other impacts that you could foresee that might come about because of this lawsuit?
You know, in New York City, 1/3 of our population or more, it's close to 40%, were born in a foreign country. If you're in the borough of Queens, every other person was born somewhere else. So who is going to be affected by this fear of being stopped by law enforcement, being challenged about your papers? Frankly, it's all of us. And so do we want to live in a society where casually walking to the subway or taking the Metro North, we're said, show me your papers, please? I'm usually more circumspect. I am a law professor. I can be neutral. No, this is Gestapo tactics. And if we give in to we have to enforce the immigration laws, well, then how about let's enforce our tax laws? Less than 30% of the United States is in full compliance with their tax obligations. Do we want to be stopped and asked, prove that you paid your taxes? So this is demonizing for the purpose of playing to a base, and it's affecting citizens, permanent residents, asylum applicants, people who've been granted asylum, and our undocumented populations. And I just want to give you one statistic there. In New York, the estimate is I think it's about 700,000 people are here that have overstayed their visas or entered without inspection. That number, more than half, entered with a visa and overstayed. It may be your British friend who came on a visa waiver and just is hanging out in the East Village. Those people, too, are violating the civil administrative immigration laws. But we don't tend to enforce against them. So what we are also going to see is people of color, people who have accented English, people who live in diverse neighborhoods are going to bear the brunt of this enforcement. And therefore, this is a draconian approach to a very complicated problem.
So is there any way that New York State can fight back against this lawsuit?
Of course, they're going to answer it. The first thing they'll do probably is make what's called a motion to dismiss. My belief is that it will be upheld. We have a federalist system. We have states that issue our driver's licenses, that design our marriages, that handle our divorces. How aggressive is this administration going to be to create a federal hegemonic power?
Thank you so much, Lenny Benson, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
Similar to this recent sanctuary lawsuit, New York City continues its legal battles with the federal government in relation to President Trump's executive orders. The president has signed over 60 since his return to office, more than any other in American history. Uptown Radio's Una Milliken spoke with law and policy makers about how they're challenging orders they see as unconstitutional.
Last week, some progressive New Yorkers were up in arms as a number of NYC hospitals stopped providing healthcare services to young transgender people due to a recent executive order from President Trump. New York Attorney General Letitia James issued a statement calling the decree unconstitutional. And many lawmakers agree. According to labor lawyer Charles Joseph, many of Trump's orders lack legal standing, but local politicians still need to challenge them in court.
I guess we could think of the states and the municipalities as law enforcement against the federal government.
Joseph says despite Trump's many orders, a president doesn't have the power to dictate how federal funding is being spent. That decision is up to Congress. He says a local lawyer could also argue that the order violates the 14th Amendment, which guarantees all citizens equal rights.
I think he's trying to confuse us. Like, we don't know, like, which one to respond to first. The president is there talking about what money's allowed to be spent. Well, that's not up to the executive. That's up to the legislative branch.
But Joseph says Trump's orders on immigration are another story. This week, the Department of Justice ordered corruption charges brought by local prosecutors against Mayor Adams to be dropped. The DOJ said the charges were preventing Mayor Adams from helping the Trump administration carry out federal immigration policies. Joseph says this is where simply upholding local law can't always stop an executive order.
Yeah, less on legalities and more on personnel. Because, anyone's going to have a problem pushing a bureaucracy around, trying to tear down the bureaucracy.
Idafe Akporo is a city council candidate for District 7 on the Upper West Side. He agrees. Backing existing state law is an effective way to stop any unconstitutional executive orders. Akporo is from Nigeria. He says he fled his home country due to persecution for sexuality, and he's worried about the standard that the executive order on gender-affirming care could set.
We don't know what other communities are going to be affected. So this is a time for us to come out in mass and say no.
According to Akporo, part of the success of Trump's executive orders is that some New Yorkers are willing to comply. He says to withstand pressure from the federal government, New Yorkers have to hold their elected officials, like the mayor and city council members, accountable.
That the things he's trying to do is to use powers that he doesn't have to intimidate people to fall in line. If he chooses to pass executive order that is against our state constitution, our elected leaders have to hold the constitution as the right way to go about it.
In an ex post, Vice President J.D. Vance said judges aren't allowed to control the president's legitimate power. In a statement released this week, the American Bar Association said that some of President Trump's orders pose a serious risk to our constitutional framework. Una Milliken, Columbia Radio News.
We have an update on this story. The Washington Post is reporting that a federal judge has temporarily blocked President Trump's executive order on gender-affirming care for young transgender people. The 2025 New York City mayoral race is underway. The field is crowded with 8 candidates vying to unseat incumbent Eric Adams. Polls show former Governor Andrew Cuomo with a clear lead in the Democratic primary, though he hasn't officially put his hat in the ring. Our day reporter, ZJ Young, was at City Hall to hear who New Yorkers are backing and why.
It's foggy and rainy in City Hall Park. The weather is similar to the thick mist of corruption charges surrounding Mayor Adams. Eddie Kim is sitting on a tarnished bench near the park's entrance. He's an architect and has lived here for nearly 20 years. He says Adams' case poses what he calls the erosion of local politics.
I think with this situation with Adams, we're seeing how much power the current president and the federal government is exerting on our state, which I see very problematic.
Kim says he'd like to see a more diverse candidate pool. He says he's bothered by the limited pool of options. So far, he does not prefer any of the candidates, but he does know what his biggest issue would be.
Housing, the housing market. I think the housing market touches a lot of classes, economic and social classes.
Over at the other end of the park, Danielle, a social worker, is smoking with some friends. She agrees. Affordable housing is her biggest concern too.
Literally on the way here, it's really funny that we ran into you. We were just talking about the unhoused population in New York City.
Danielle says New York City has a lot of vacant real estate, despite a housing crisis.
It's like, this is well known. This is a fact. We know that people are struggling with money. We know that people are struggling with food. We know that our LGBTQIA friends are under attack.
Danielle believes that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is the ideal candidate to fix the city's problems.
For me, I'm looking at you, AOC, let's go. You represent the Bronx. In general, I know that there's a lot of issues in politics, and I feel like she does also know that and tries to address it. But, I'm looking at you, girl. Let's go. Let's go, please. We need you.
Rohan Srinivasan, a paralegal, is standing in the middle of the park. He's dressed in a brown blazer and a loosely knotted tie. He's also not planning to support Adams.
I mean, Eric Adams definitely seems like he'd be willing to play ball with what Trump does, especially for his own sake. So, yeah, I'm definitely not a fan. It's upsetting.
Srinivasan is thinking of supporting the Democratic Socialists of Americans candidate, Zohran Mamdani. He believes the group could bring changes to the problems in the city that he's concerned about.
I mean, I think homelessness is an obvious issue. It's only gotten worse.
Making New York City better is what any candidates have to convince voters they can do. They have 9 months to do whatever they can before the November election. ZJ Yan, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. There's more to come. Stay with us. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm host Hannah Weaver. Next up, Flora Warshaw is at New York's flower markets to see how vendors are faring ahead of Valentine's Day. Also, U.S. professional figure skaters and their coaches are upping the ante in order to keep up with their peers abroad. These stories and more coming up. But first, the headlines.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Modiaish.
People are concerned about public safety, affordability. They're concerned about, they're talking about these important items that are important. In our administration,
we have news on the Adams corruption case. Daniel Sassoon, the interim U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, has resigned. According to the New York Times, 2 other officials with the Federal Public Integrity Unit have also stepped down. The Justice Department instructed Sassoon to withdraw corruption charges against Mayor Eric Adams. Sassoon, who had backed the case against Mr. Adams, informed her office of her decision in a brief email around 2 p.m. The New York Times obtained the email in which she wrote, quote, "It has been my greatest honor to represent the United States and to pursue justice as a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York." Big news in football. The Jets are getting rid of their star quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. The football coach, Aaron Glenn, and general manager, Darren Moogie, released a statement, quote, "Last week we met with Aaron and shared that our intention was to move in a different direction at quarterback. Rodgers joined the Jets in 2023 after 18 seasons in the Green Bay Packers. He suffered a torn Achilles tendon at the very beginning of 2023 season. He is trying to figure out what's next, but may retire." The city of New York is warning citizens on Twitter not to touch dead birds. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has created a form to report the location of those dead birds. Typical symptoms of avian flu include diarrhea, nasal discharge, coughing, and sneezing. The link is on our website. A heads up for credit card users. A new bill would prohibit businesses operating in New York City from setting credit card minimum dollar higher than $10. Modiaish, Columbia Radio News.
Tomorrow is Valentine's Day. Flora Warshaw went down to the New York City Wholesale Flower District to discuss with shop owners how they are preparing for not only the big day, but how Trump's proposal for tariffs affects even your flowers.
It's 6 a.m. on February the 13th. It's still dark out and pouring with rain. But flower shop owners on West 28th Street are opening up shop and ready to get to work. So how big is Valentine's Day for shops like these? Abra Flora is a wholesale flower shop. It's surrounded by bouquets of all colours and sizes, and people are rushing in and out of the store. Bill Schlink, one of the florists, explains the importance of Valentine's Day for a store like this.
It's pretty huge. Yeah, it's a big day. We, Generally this time of year is pretty slow in the flower district, but Valentine's you get this 4 or 5 day spike.
Do you get a lot of last minute boyfriends running in not realizing it's a wholesale flower market?
Yes. And they don't even ask the price. So that's great.
Ali is not a last minute boyfriend. She's a floral designer, preparing for the big weekend ahead.
I'm here to create a few arrangements for a wine bar down in the West Village. It's Valentine's Day weekend, so yes, it is for their Thursday, Friday, and Saturday dinner.
The New York City Flower District has been here since the 1870s, and it remains a very tight-knit community.
But it's a lot of family-owned businesses, and everybody knows everyone. I could walk down the block and you'll see me waving and stuff to almost everybody. Even customers. They've been around for many, many years.
Yet as Valentine's Day prep is underway, the threat of tariffs loom. Trump is set to resume his tariffs on Mexico and Canada in a few weeks. Store owners are also concerned tariffs with Colombia might go into effect. And if they do, it could affect something as simple as your floral bouquet. Flowers found in these wholesale shops come from all over the world. Joe Glazer is the owner of Floramets, another shop in the district.
All our flowers are grown in South America, Ecuador, Colombia, Holland, Mexico, Canada. It's a wide range.
And so, he says, the cost of the flowers could go up.
We're preparing ourselves, yes. Hopefully we don't have to increase our prices to our customers.
Florist Bill Schling.
If it affects me, it's affecting the next guy, gal. So we all kind of have to, absorb it together.
But if there's one thing these florists can agree on, it's the uncertainty.
If tariffs comes in, it's going to, increase the flowers a little bit, but I'm not sure how long that's going to last either. So I have a good feeling that everything should be fine.
For now, all they can do is prep for the big day ahead.
No, happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Flora Warshaw from Uptown Radio.
We are at the Down and Quilt Shop on Amsterdam between 85th and 86th, and I'm Beth Skolton. I am the owner for 40 years, 40 long years at this point, and we just keep trying to sell stuff that people want. When my mom came up and helped me open up when I was 23, she did all the sewing, like duvet covers, pillowcases, dust ruffles, curtains, and I got my father involved. He's an engineer, and he used to have a factory in Ohio, and he made the down comforters. And that was a long time ago. Now we do lots of reupholstery, so that you can't get online, so that's helped us a lot. And now we have all those crazy college stuff in the window that old people, young people, they like.
You're listening to Uptown Radio, Thursdays at 4.
The World Figure Skating Championships are here, and female U.S. skaters are competing for gold. It's been 19 years since the women won gold in the senior level at Worlds, and they've lagged behind their international peers in the sport's more complicated jumps. Now, U.S. skaters are trying to catch up with their peers. As Hannah Lorenzo reports, this isn't just challenging for the skaters. It's challenging coaches as well.
The ice rink is packed at Chelsea Piers. It's a Sunday afternoon. Adult skaters maneuver around kids wearing colorful helmets. To the left of the rink entrance, Dakota Rogers-Myers is sitting in a cluttered office.
I was born and raised in New York. I was actually a figure skater here at Chelsea Piers. So I started here skating when I was 4.
Rogers-Myers skated for over 20 years and competed at the regional level. Now, she's a coach here. To make the podium at international competitions, American female skaters are learning to do the triple axel and the quad, the jumps they hope will get them higher scores.
The U.S. hasn't had a good female skater in a while, where you had, back in the day we had Michelle Kwan, Sasha Cohen, people like that. I'm almost glad that we're going more difficult and we're pushing a little bit harder and we're pushing the boundaries a little bit, because it's putting skating back on the map a little bit again.
But Rogers-Myers also says this puts pressure on young skaters and makes skating harder for coaches like her to teach. Her students may have watched Amber Glenn, a 25-year-old who won U.S. Nationals last month.
Please welcome now Amber Glenn.
That includes figure skater Amber Glenn.
So it's been a career of perseverance for Amber Glenn.
Her triple axel sets her apart from many of her competitors.
I take somebody like Amber Glenn and go, look at her, look what she's capable of, you could be that. But I think it's a delicate balance because you need to find the line where it's like, I want you to inspire to be that versus, oh, I'm never gonna be her.
Skaters used to have to rotate once in the air. Now, they're expected to rotate 2 to 3 times, while moving on thin blades on a slippery surface. Rogers-Meyer says that can be hard to teach to young students.
I have a 8-year-old who just landed her axel. My brain is telling me, okay, by age 9, she needs double saddle, double toe, double loop. We need to get on this. We need to start training them already.
A few subway stops uptown at Central Park, Georgina Blackwell coaches young students at Woolman Rink. She's concerned about the higher level jumps.
I think it's great to have as, an extra trick, but for it to be expected, I think is really, really dangerous.
Blackwell looks back on young Russian skaters who became famous for nailing the triple axel and quad jumps at international competitions. But they also received career-limiting injuries.
The people doing those jumps are the youngest. The girls, they're maybe 15. And I just don't think it's sustainable physically.
Both coaches will be watching next week as American skaters compete at the 4 continents, an annual international competition where skaters prepare for Worlds and hopefully the Olympics. That is, if they can land those jumps. Hannah Lorenzo, Columbia Radio News.
Broadway has been in a slow recovery since the pandemic. The industry finally gained some headway, but the rollout of congestion pricing raised some initial concerns that the plan would hinder the comeback. Dana Binfet took a trip to Manhattan's Theater District to see how the road tolls are impacting ticket sales on Broadway.
It's a chilly Friday night outside the Ambassador Theater on 49th Street. Taxis race through the streets, and the sidewalks are busy with avid fans visiting the Great White Way.
We drove. We're here to see Chicago.
John Shupeck and Lauren Catino live upstate in Clarkstown. It's the first time they've come into the city since congestion pricing went into effect, so they weighed all their transportation options.
Well, I did suggest taking the train.
He wanted to take the train, but I said absolutely not. We're driving. He's just going to have to absorb that cost.
The Broadway League is the national trade association for the theater industry, tracking weekly box office stats and show attendance data. According to their records, the last week of December saw a high of over 300,000 attendees, but by mid-January, those sales dropped by almost 50,000 tickets.
Well, so far, Broadway is doing a lot better this winter than it did last winter when we didn't have congestion pricing. So far, it's a winner.
Danny Perlstein is the Policy and Communications Director for Writers Alliance, a grassroots organization in the city that holds elected officials accountable for better public transit.
We know there are more Broadway shows open, so we can't exactly say that, the tremendous amount of additional revenue is all owing to congestion pricing. But I think it's fair to say that the shows aren't hurting. And, we also, I think, can say confidently that it's not reducing the number of people in Manhattan.
Although Broadway shows are doing well, the business owners are noticing changes in the number of cars heading into the area.
It definitely impacts the parking business.
Dionisio Gomez manages the ABM parking structure right across from Broadway musicals Wicked and Romeo and Juliet.
Do you have an idea of what last January was like compared to this January?
Yes, it's about 20% less. I also spoke to other companies and they're almost the same, 20% down.
Audiences aren't the only commuters heading into the city for Broadway shows. Congestion pricing can also impact the behind-the-scenes teams that stage the productions every night.
Those of us who work on Broadway, I would not consider us wealthy suburbanites.
Mary Dorman-Phaneuf has worked on Broadway for 22 years and is currently a cellist in the orchestra pit at the Great Gatsby. She commutes daily from Hartsdale and Westchester County.
I mean, my biggest issue with the congestion pricing is there are no trains that come back after a Broadway show. And I know for a fact it impacts people who want to come and see a show who live anywhere north of the city because they can't get home again afterwards because there are no trains.
Back out on the street, Mark and Sandra Redfray are waiting in line at the Ambassador Theater. They only come into the city a few times a year and just consider the toll as part of the cost. Tonight they're seeing their favorite performer in cabaret at the Kit Kat Club.
Are you guys excited?
Yes.
So worth the drive-in.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime that you get an opportunity to see Adam Lambert, absolutely.
It may be too soon to judge the impacts of the new tolls, but with Tony Award season right around the corner, ticket sales are expected to rise. Dana Binfet, Uptown Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show. Our foreman today was executive producer Caroline McCarthy. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Madeline Riley. Special thanks to our senior editor Una Milliken and assistant editor Joya Ma. Director Hannah Lorenzo coordinated our studio production with Dana Binfet. Thanks to our newscaster Maud Yesh and our day reporters Flora Warshaw and ZJ Young. Our instructors Sally Herships, Ben Shapiro, and Priscilla Alabi advised our staff. I'm your host, Hannah Weaver. Uptown Radio is live on Thursdays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.